superheroesecretsoflongevity.com. Something that I've been exploring more recently. I've definitely known about the concept for a long time, but as an ideology, more than ever, I find myself resonating with it. It's the idea that's known as voluntarism. And this is a concept that can generally be applied to political ideas, is what we would like to see applied to political systems in terms of the way they affect the population and deal with the population. But instead of trying to apply this onto a system, it's more something that people have to adopt themselves, and just as the name suggests, people should adopt it voluntarily. So voluntarism is the idea that people should be able to do what they want as long as they're not impinging on other people's ability to do what they want. So this is a kind of non-coercion principle, and if you were to think about it, one would think that one would have to have some degree of sociopathy or psychopathy going on to want to coerce someone into doing something that they don't actually want to do. It's one thing to lead someone and direct someone that needs that or can benefit from that. For example, a teacher and a student, there's going to be a difference in power there, but there's still a voluntary fact that the student's there to learn and the teacher's there to teach. But if the students were made to go to class and they were having a gun held to their head if they didn't, that would then be involuntary. So a lot of things exist in our society. I'm not going to get too heavy into the political side of it, but there's a lot of things that are considered wrong by even a lot of people, but really the only harm they might be doing, if any at all, is to the person that might be engaging in them. And there's a system set up that is basically holding a gun to your head and saying, if you do this, we're coming after you. It's not necessarily the gun's going to be fired, but, police have guns is the idea I'm talking about here. They'll come, arrest you, and take you in if you go against the frame of view that the public at large has voted into place at some point in history. Now, I really want to focus on the health side of this, and I think I've given you a good framework for what it is. I definitely recommend just looking at the word voluntarism online to see the variety of definitions and examples that can be found describing that. One important thing that I think is the key around it is that we do need to initiate force when it comes to defending ourselves. So, say I had a home and I had things in the home that I want to protect because they're mine, and someone wants to take that from me. I should be able to defend my residence or have someone else defend it to prevent people from taking what I have in my possession that I've accumulated through my own effort. So the principle of nonviolence isn't pacifism, meaning under no circumstances do you put up a defense. It means you defend what needs to be defended for your own well-being. So that argument is actually used and twisted in ways that might not be the best thing for people, and there's actually fights ongoing about this. Probably the biggest area is vaccines. So a common point that's actually brought up on the pro-vaccine side versus the against vaccine side, and this is specifically applying to schools. You'd have the anti-vaccine camp saying, well, if your vaccine works so well, my kid should be able to exist among your kids without the vaccine, and if he gets sick, your kids will be fine. Whereas the pro-vaccine side is saying, no, we must force vaccination on large groups of people because that gives greater protection to even those who have the vaccines. When if someone who doesn't have the vaccine gets it, they might pass it on regardlessly. So, without getting into the details of who's right within that discussion, if we think about voluntarism, then technically there's an argument for both sides. The pro-vaccine side is saying, in this case, we need to use initiation of force, forcing other people in the group, if we're talking about kids, to have vaccines to defend our own kids from getting something that they could potentially get from someone who is unvaccinated. The anti-vaccine side is, of course, saying, well, no, it should be voluntary. It should be completely my right what I decide to have done for my child, whether it's a vaccine or not. Same argument is occurring in many different things. Certain types of workplaces are trying to enforce vaccinations, saying, especially with nurses, that nurses need to get the flu shot, or nurses need to get this shot, that shot. And there's again, there's arguments to both sides as to why it should or shouldn't be put in as a legislation. So if we focus on the idea of schools and children getting vaccinated, a good way to think about this is to think of the school itself, if we're talking about public school, is a coercion in and of itself. If all schooling was private, and I don't want to get into a debate about the benefits of public versus private schools, if you were just to think a moment that, you save a portion of your tax money, instead there's all these different options for private schools, you'd have the people that didn't want vaccines sending their kids to a place that had a policy that allowed them to be unvaccinated, and then you'd have parents that had vaccinated kids and had similar ideologies around health in that way would have their kids at a school. And if the school didn't quite meet their standards, they could move their kid to another school. However, in public school, you're not allowed to change schools. You have to send your kid to the closest school for this thing. And if they were to initiate some legislation that forced someone else to get something that they didn't want to get in terms of a vaccine, then it's coercion on top of coercion. There's no denying that. Even if that were to hypothetically prevent a disease from spreading to people who had already gotten the vaccine, you are impinging on someone's individual rights, both in the school system as well as with these things that are being implemented. So what I'm kind of getting at here is that when you start to coerce people into doing something that takes away their freedom of choice, it becomes a slippery slope, and you're going to start dividing and conquering different aspects of people's lives and lifestyles to try and suit a higher ideology that is trying to conform people into these rigid boxes. Now, if you consider some of the other rules that are put in place in institutions like schools, you have sometimes dress codes, you have rules around language, in terms of being able to swear or not, and there's a lot of other stuff that can sometimes be put into place that gets more and more trivial and not quite something we want to focus on right now. But essentially what I'm saying is that when you get these systems in place that force you to do things, and the same could be said about the larger government and people's individual choices in their homes and in their lifestyles, the more the coercion and the stripping of rights is needed to take place to just suit the desires of particular groups. So you look in the US, the same thing could be said about gun legislation. You have, an incident where someone's shot and people are calling for a ban on guns, even though some people want to have guns and should have the right to have them for personal safety. But instead of those people who don't want guns around them setting up a smaller network where it's free of guns, if they want to create that, they want to have this vast reaching policy that reaches well beyond their own communities and their own immediate surroundings, which is them imposing themselves and trying to take away the freedoms of other people. Now, if we move back towards health, we can see a similar, almost identical thing happening with the raw milk movement. And this is one of the first areas I really got focused on this whole concept. It just completely baffled my mind that there's an entity or group or a system in place that people decided on, whether it was the public or politicians, that oversees my choices when it comes to raw milk and my consumption of it. It's absurd to think that there might have been some cases of people getting sick from raw milk that wasn't done the right way, but why people that were not conscientious with that and their mistake causes a wide-reaching, all-encompassing policy to be put in place that prevents and strips people of the freedom to do something as simple and basic as feeding themselves with something that is very nourishing and even less harmless than the processed versions of that food. Now, I know the people in the place of power that have put that legislation in place don't understand that it's a health-giving food. And once again, these are all arguments, whether it's vaccines or raw milk, that I'm not getting into in this video. But it's about the idea of trying to take away people's freedom of choice when it really has no concern on other people. It's like you have some neurotic person, I know this doesn't exist like this, but it's what the ideology feels like, is that there's some person looking down over us that is extremely neurotic and sees one instance of something bad happening and doesn't want it to ever happen to anyone else again because they're so worried and concerned and can't contain it within themselves that they actually suppress you and try to take away your rights just to make themselves feel better. So it's kind of like a weird self-guilt trip that the government's on, that they don't want to see the public get hurt, so they take the rights away from everybody, even if there's people that are smart enough to take responsibility for themselves. So I hope you can understand my sentiment on this topic and see the areas of health that this reaches out into. There's definitely other areas, and it's going to be increasing, and I really hope that people can adopt this idea in their own lives, which will, over time, affect the world at large. Because personally, I think this concept, voluntarism, which is not, again, pacifism, but is a non-violent approach to life and view of the world, is one of the healthiest things we can adopt, because it's going to naturally affect your communication with people. You're going to start catching yourself in areas of your life where you might be trying to impose yourself on other people in a coercive way. I don't mean, once again, there's nothing wrong with being dominant and leading and a figure in life for other people, that you're a support system for other people, whether you're a parent, a teacher, a coach. But the key is not being in one of those roles or something similar and becoming coercive and trying to force people to do things because you think it's good for them, because then you're taking away their free will. And free will is one of the best things that we need to preserve within ourselves and encourage other people to preserve within themselves as well. So let me know what you think of this video in the comments below. Like, favorite, and share this video if you feel so inclined. And with that, I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limits.